Billionaire rushed to the hospital in anger, but one newborn cry destroyed the cold walls of his heart. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from, and once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago, but Elias Thorne hadn't noticed. He sat behind the mahogany desk of his 42nd floor office, staring at quarterly aviation reports that blurred together like watercolors in rain. The Seattle skyline stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in a loop of memories he'd spent 8 months trying to bury, her laugh echoing through the elevator, her fingers accidentally brushing his as she handed him documents, the way she'd tucked that stubborn strand of auburn hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. Ava Bennett had been gone from Thorne Aviation for 8 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Not that he was counting. The buzzer on his desk phone jolted him back to reality. His current assistant, a efficient but utterly forgettable woman named Constance, spoke through the intercom. "Mr. Thorne, you have the Morrison contract review in 10 minutes, and the board meeting at 3. Should I cancel them?" Elias said without looking up. "Sir? Cancel everything for today." He rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion that had become his constant companion since that morning when he'd destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to him. The memory crashed over him like a rogue wave. Ava standing in his office doorway, her green eyes wide with hurt and confusion. "Elias, please, just listen to me. There's nothing between Jameson and me. There never was." But he'd already made up his mind, already convinced himself that the polite smile she'd given his business partner during their merger meeting meant something more. "It was good while it lasted, Ava. Let's keep this professional from here on out." The way her face crumpled, the way she'd whispered, "I thought you knew me better than that." Elias pushed back from his desk and walked to the window. Somewhere out there in this vast city, she was living a life that didn't include him. He'd made sure of that with his paranoid assumptions, and his inability to trust the one person who'd actually seen through his carefully constructed walls. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer. Constance knew better than to transfer calls when he was in one of his moods, but something made him glance at the display. Unknown number. Local area code. "Thorne. Mr. Thorne?" The voice was female, professional, with an underlying urgency that made his chest tighten. "This is Nurse Davidson from Harborview Medical Center. I'm calling about Ava Bennett." The world tilted. "What about her?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "She was admitted this morning in active labor. She asked us to contact you. Said you were the father." The phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the desk before he caught it. His knees threatened to buckle. "Mr. Thorne? Are you there? Labor. Father. Ava." 1,000 thoughts crashed through his mind simultaneously. The math was impossible to ignore. 8 months since she'd left, 9 months for a pregnancy, which meant she'd been carrying his child when he'd thrown her out of his life like she was nothing. "Sir, if you're planning to come, she's in the maternity ward, room." Elias was already moving, grabbing his keys, his coat, leaving everything else behind. His heart hammered against his ribs as he waited for the elevator, each second stretching into eternity. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights and half-formed prayers to a God he hadn't spoken to since he was 7 years old. He parked haphazardly in the emergency zone, not caring about tickets or towing. The antiseptic smell of the hospital hit him like a physical force as he strode through the automatic doors. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished linoleum as he followed signs to the maternity ward, each step echoing the frantic beating of his heart. He was almost to the elevator when he heard it, a sound that stopped him dead in his tracks and shattered every carefully constructed wall he'd built around his heart. The thin, desperate wail of a newborn baby, echoing down the sterile corridor like a battle cry. And in that moment, Elias Thorne realized that everything he thought he knew about his life had just changed forever. That cry pierced through every defense Elias had ever built, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. He stood frozen in the hospital corridor, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, his carefully maintained composure cracking like ice under pressure. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unforgiving white. Families hurried past him, some crying tears of joy, others clutching each other in worry. But he remained motionless, a statue in the middle of their chaos. A baby. His baby. The elevator dinged, and a young couple emerged, the woman cradling a bundle of pink blankets. They were laughing softly, whispering to each other with the kind of intimacy that made Elias's chest ache with recognition. He remembered being that happy once, for exactly 3 months and 12 days before his paranoia had poisoned everything good in his life. "Sir, are you all right?" A nurse in scrubs covered with tiny cartoon stethoscopes was looking at him with concern. She couldn't be more than 25, with kind eyes that reminded him painfully of Ava's. "I'm looking for room." He realized he'd hung up before getting the room number. Ava Bennett. She had a baby. The nurse's expression softened with understanding. "Are you the father?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Was he? Biologically, almost certainly. But what did that word even mean? His own father had been nothing more than a signature on trust fund documents and a voice on the other end of boarding school phone calls. "I think so," he said, and the honesty of it surprised him. "Room 314, 3rd floor." She pointed toward the elevator bank. Visiting hours end at 8, but for immediate family. He was already walking away, his long strides eating up the distance to the elevator. His hand shook as he pressed the button, a tremor he hadn't experienced since his first major business presentation 15 years ago. The ride to the 3rd floor felt eternal. He caught his reflection in the polished steel doors, disheveled dark hair, 5 o'clock shadow, eyes that looked like they'd seen a ghost, which in a way, they had. The ghost of the man he could have been if he hadn't been so afraid of being hurt, that he'd hurt everyone else first. Room 314 was halfway down a corridor that smelled of industrial disinfectant and new beginnings. Through the partially opened door he could hear quiet voices. A woman's soft murmur, the rustle of blankets, the gentle hush of medical equipment. He raised his hand to knock, then let it fall. What was he supposed to say? "Sorry I abandoned you when you were carrying my child because I was too much of a coward to have a conversation." Before he could lose his nerve entirely, a different nurse emerged from the room. Older, with steel gray hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd delivered 1,000 babies and heard every excuse in the book. "You must be Mr. Thorne," she said, and there was something in her tone that made it clear Ava had told her exactly what kind of man he was. "She's been asking if you were coming." "Is she? Are they both okay?" "Healthy baby boy, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Mom's exhausted but doing fine." The nurse studied him with sharp eyes. "She went through labor alone, you know. 12 hours, no partner, no family. Just her and the pain." The words landed like bullets, each one finding its mark. Elias closed his eyes briefly, imagining Ava scared and alone, clutching the hospital bed rails through contractions with no one to hold her hand or tell her she was brave. Can I see them?" "That depends. Are you here to make things better, or to make them worse?" He met her stare directly. "I don't know yet." Something in his honesty must have satisfied her, because she stepped aside. "She's awake. The baby's sleeping. And Mr. Thorne, whatever you did before, now's your chance to do better." He nodded, not trusting his voice, and stepped into the room. The first thing he saw was Ava, propped up against pillows, her auburn hair damp with sweat and falling in gentle waves around her face. She looked exhausted and radiant and absolutely heartbreaking all at once. Her green eyes met his across the small space, and he saw no anger there, just a bone-deep weariness that made him want to fall to his knees and beg her forgiveness. The second thing he saw was the bassinet beside her bed, and the tiny, perfect human being sleeping inside it. His son. "Hello, Elias," Ava said quietly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "I wasn't sure you'd come." The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled with 8 months of unspoken words and broken promises. Elias stood in the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides, drinking in the sight of her. Ava looked different, not just tired from labor but changed in some fundamental way. There was a strength in her posture that hadn't been there before, a quiet dignity that made his chest tighten with both admiration and regret. "You look," he started, then stopped. "Beautiful, exhausted, like everything he'd thrown away." None of the words felt adequate. "Like I just delivered your son?" She finished for him, and there was no bitterness in her voice, just a matter-of-fact gentleness that somehow hurt more than anger would have. He took a tentative step into the room, his expensive shoes silent on the hospital linoleum. The bassinet drew his eyes like a magnet, but he couldn't bring himself to look directly at the sleeping baby yet. If he did, if he saw his own features reflected in that tiny face, he might break completely. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Ava's laugh was soft and hollow. "When? Before or after you decided I was sleeping with your business partner based on a polite smile?" The words hit him like a slap, but he deserved them. He deserved worse. "Ava, I tried to tell you that morning," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "I came to your office at 7:30 before anyone else arrived. I had the test results in my purse and this ridiculous speech planned about how scared I was, but how maybe we could figure it out together. Elias remembered that morning with painful clarity. She'd knocked on his door, looking nervous and beautiful in a way that had made his paranoid heart assume the worst. He'd been so convinced that she was coming to confess her affair with Jameson that he'd cut her off before she could speak. "Save it, Ava. I know what this is about. Let's just keep things simple." She'd stared at him for a long moment, her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. Then she'd simply nodded and walked away. He'd thought it was guilt. It had been heartbreak. "I was going to tell you about the baby," she whispered, her fingers absently stroking the edge of the hospital blanket. "But you looked at me like I was a stranger, like everything we'd shared meant nothing. So I decided that if you could throw us away so easily, maybe you didn't deserve to know." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Elias sank into the uncomfortable visitor's chair beside her bed, suddenly feeling every one of his 39 years. "I was scared," he said quietly, the words scraping against his throat like broken glass. "Scared that you'd figure out I wasn't worth staying for. Scared that what we had was too good to be real. When I saw you smile at Jameson during that meeting, you saw what you expected to see," Ava said, turning to look at him fully for the first time since he'd entered the room. "You saw proof that I was just like everyone else who'd left you. But Elias, I never wanted to leave. You pushed me out." A small sound from the bassinet made them both freeze. The baby stirred, tiny fists emerging from the swaddle blanket, and made a soft mewling noise that went straight to Elias's heart like an arrow. "He's been sleeping for 2 hours, Ava said, her voice softening as she gazed at the bassinet. "The longest stretch since he was born. I think he was waiting for you. What's his name?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile ghosted across her lips. "I couldn't decide. I kept thinking his father should have a say in that." The simple statement undid him. After everything he'd put her through, after abandoning her when she needed him most, she'd still reserved that right for him, still held space for him in their son's life. "Can I?" He gestured toward the bassinet, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava nodded, and Elias stood on unsteady legs. 3 steps brought him to the edge of the bassinet, and he looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was perfect, impossibly small and absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair that looked exactly like Elias's baby pictures, and Ava's delicate nose. His little chest rose and fell with the rhythm of new life, and his tiny fingers were curled into fists, as if he was already ready to fight the world. "He looks like you," Ava whispered from behind him. Elias reached out with one finger to touch the baby's hand, and impossibly those tiny fingers uncurled and wrapped around his, holding on with surprising strength. And in that moment, as his son's grip anchored him to something bigger than his own fear, Elias Thorne realized he was looking at his second chance. "We need to talk," he said without taking his eyes off the baby. "Really talk, about everything." "Yes," Ava agreed quietly. "We do." The baby's grip on his finger was surprisingly strong, like he was anchoring Elias to something real for the first time in months. "He has your stubborn streak already," Ava said softly, watching as their son refused to let go. There was something almost like warmth in her voice, the first crack in the careful distance she'd maintained since he'd walked through the door. Elias couldn't look away from the tiny face. Every detail seemed impossibly precious, the way the baby's eyelashes fanned against his cheeks, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the miniature fingernails that were somehow perfectly formed. This was his child, his son. The reality of it was overwhelming. "How did you manage?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "All these months, alone." "I wasn't completely alone." Ava shifted carefully in the hospital bed, wincing slightly. "Mrs. Kellerman from the apartment next door helped me set up the nursery. And there's a support group at the community center for single mothers. They taught me about car seats and cribs and all the things I never thought I'd need to know." Each word was a knife between his ribs. She'd built a life, a support system, a future for their child, all while he'd been drowning in his own misery and pride. He'd been so focused on his wounded ego that he'd missed everything that actually mattered. "I bought every pregnancy book Barnes & Noble had in stock," she continued, and now there was definitely a hint of a smile in her voice. "I think I memorized what to expect when you're expecting. I used to read to him every night before bed. You knew it was a boy? Since the 20-week ultrasound. I almost called you that day. I had your number dialed and everything. But then I remembered the way you looked at me that last morning, and I couldn't do it." The baby stirred again, making a soft cooing sound that was somehow both heartbreaking and healing. His eyes opened slowly, dark gray, like storm clouds, exactly like Elias's own. "Hello there," Elias whispered, and the baby seemed to focus on his voice. "I'm sorry I'm late." Ava was quiet for a long moment, watching the interaction between father and son. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "The nurses need a name for the birth certificate. I've been calling him Baby Bennett for now." "Bennett? It's my name," she said simply. "I didn't think I had the right to use yours." The assumption hit him harder than any accusation could have. Of course she'd used her own name. Why would she give his name to a child whose father had abandoned them both? "What would you have called him?" he asked. "If things had been different?" Ava was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, Wesley James. It was my grandfather's name. He raised me after my parents died in that car accident when I was 12. He was the only man who never let me down. The implication stung, but Elias accepted it. He'd earned her distrust. "Wesley," he repeated, testing the name. The baby's eyes seemed to widen at the sound. "Wesley Thorne." "Elias, he's my son too," he said quietly, finally looking up from the bassinet to meet her eyes. "I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I did. I know I destroyed whatever trust we had, but he's my son and I want him to have my name. I want him to know he belongs to both of us." Ava studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. And what happens when you get scared again? When something makes you doubt or second-guess everything? Do I get another cold dismissal? Does Wesley lose his father all over again? The questions were fair and brutal and necessary. Elias carefully extracted his finger from his son's grip and moved to the chair beside Ava's bed, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes and the careful walls she'd built around her heart. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," he said. "I can't promise I won't get scared or say the wrong thing, but I can promise that I'll never walk away again. Not from him. Not from you. Not without a fight." "Pretty words, Elias. You always were good with pretty words. Then let me prove it with actions." He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Let me be here. Let me learn how to change diapers and warm bottles and do all the things I should have been doing for the past 8 months. Let me show you that I can be the man you both deserve." Ava closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked every bit as young and vulnerable as she had that first day she'd walked into his office with her resume and her nervous smile. "I'm tired, Elias," she whispered. "I'm so tired of being strong all the time. I don't know if I have the energy to teach you how to love us." The admission broke something open in his chest. "Then don't. Just let me figure it out. Let me be here while I figure it out." Wesley chose that moment to let out a small cry, and Ava's eyes immediately opened, her body tensing with the instinctive response of a new mother. But before she could move, Elias was already standing. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing toward the bassinet. She hesitated, then nodded. Elias had never held a baby before, but something about his son felt natural in his arms, like a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. Wesley settled almost immediately, his crying subsiding into soft whimpers. "He knows you," Ava said, wonder creeping into her voice. "Or he's just tired of listening to us talk," Elias replied. But there was amazement in his own voice too. As he looked down at his son's perfect face, Elias made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would earn his place in this family, even if it meant learning to trust himself again. 3 days later, Elias found himself standing in the baby section of Target at 6 in the morning, completely overwhelmed. He'd never realized how many different types of diapers existed. Newborn, size 1, sensitive skin, overnight protection, organic cotton. The options seemed endless. A young mother with a toddler in her cart gave him a sympathetic look as he stood frozen in the aisle, clutching a hastily scribbled list that Ava had given him. "First time?" she asked kindly. "Is it that obvious?" She smiled. The deer-in-headlights expression gives it away. "How old?" 3 days. The word still felt surreal coming out of his mouth. 3 days ago, he'd been a childless billionaire who ate takeout for dinner and worked 16-hour days. Now he was a father, standing in Target at dawn because Wesley had gone through his last diaper at 4 a.m., and Ava was too exhausted to leave the hospital yet. Newborn diapers, then, and get the sensitive skin ones. Baby's skin is delicate at first. She pointed to a blue package. "You'll go through about 10 a day for the first month." 10 a day. Elias did the mental math and grabbed 3 packages, then reconsidered and grabbed 2 more. Better to be prepared. By the time he made it back to Harborview Medical Center, the morning shift nurses were making their rounds. He'd become a familiar face over the past 3 days, arriving early with coffee for Ava and staying late to learn everything he could about caring for a newborn. It wasn't easy. Nothing about parenthood was intuitive for him. He'd fumbled through his first diaper change, needed 3 attempts to properly swaddle Wesley, and had nearly panicked when the baby wouldn't stop crying during his second night. But he was learning, and more importantly, he was staying. "You're back early," Ava noted as he entered room 314. She was sitting up in bed, Wesley cradled against her chest, and there was something different about her expression, less guarded, more willing to let him into their small bubble. "I wanted to be here when Dr. Martinez makes her rounds to ask about the discharge process." He set the bag of supplies on the windowsill and pulled out a coffee cup from the hospital cafeteria. "Decaf, with that vanilla creamer you like." "You remembered." "I remember everything about you, Ava. That's been the problem." She accepted the coffee gratefully, careful not to disturb Wesley. "The discharge papers should be ready this afternoon. I'll need to set up the pediatrician appointments, and there's a follow-up visit in 2 weeks. We'll need to set up the appointments," Elias corrected gently. "If you'll let me be part of this." Ava was quiet for a moment, studying his face. "My apartment is small. 1 bedroom, barely enough space for me and the baby. It's not exactly what you're used to." Elias had been dreading this conversation. He'd driven past her apartment building the night before, a modest complex in Ballard, the kind of place where working people lived paycheck to paycheck. It was clean and safe, but tiny, and the thought of his son growing up in a space smaller than his office made his chest tight with worry. "I have a house," he said carefully. "Plenty of room, a good neighborhood, space for Wesley to grow up. You could both." "No." The word was firm but not angry. "I'm not moving in with you, Elias. We're not playing house just because we have a baby together. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" She shifted Wesley to her other arm, and the baby made a soft sound of contentment. "Look, I appreciate that you want to be involved. I do. But I won't be your charity case, and I won't pretend we're something we're not just to make co-parenting easier." The honesty stung, but he respected it. "Then what do you want? How do we make this work?" "I don't know yet." She looked down at Wesley, her expression softening. "I know I want him to know his father. I know I want him to grow up feeling loved and secure. Beyond that, we'll have to figure it out as we go." A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Martinez entered, followed by a social worker Elias hadn't met before, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard. "Good morning, Ms. Bennett." "Mr. Thorne." Dr. Martinez smiled warmly. "I have good news. Mom and baby are both cleared for discharge this afternoon. All the tests came back normal, feeding is going well, and Wesley is gaining weight beautifully." "That's wonderful," Ava said, relief evident in her voice. The social worker stepped forward. "I'm Janet Morrison. I just need to go over a few things for the discharge paperwork. Living arrangements, emergency contacts, that sort of thing." "Of course." Ava straightened slightly, and Elias could see her preparing for what she clearly expected to be a difficult conversation. "Will you be going home with the father?" Janet asked, pen poised over her clipboard. "No. I have my own apartment. Wesley and I will be fine there." Janet made a note, then looked at Elias. "And your involvement, Mr. Thorne?" "I'll be as involved as Ava allows me to be," he said honestly. "I want to be a good father to Wesley. I'm still learning how." Something in his answer must have satisfied Janet, because she smiled and made another note. It's refreshing to see parents who are focused on what's best for the child, rather than their own egos. We'll need to establish a formal custody arrangement eventually, but for now the most important thing is that Wesley has 2 parents who love him. Love. The word hung in the air like a promise and a challenge. Elias looked at his son, sleeping peacefully in Ava's arms, and realized with startling clarity that it was true. Somewhere between the first time he'd held Wesley and this moment, love had crept in past all his defenses. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice careful. "The birth certificate. We discussed the name." Ava met his eyes across the small hospital room. "Wesley James Thorne," she said quietly. "If you're sure you want that responsibility." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." As Janet wrote down the name that would make his son officially his, Elias felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. This was about becoming the man Wesley deserved to call father. And maybe, if he was very lucky and worked very hard, becoming the man Ava might someday trust again. 2 a.m. had become Elias's new favorite time of day, though he never would have believed it a week ago. He sat in the worn recliner beside Wesley's crib, bottle abandoned his tree climbing and ran toward them, throwing himself onto Elias's lap with the complete trust of a child who had never known anything but love and security. "Mama, Daddy, look what I found." He opened his small fist to reveal the ladybug, which immediately flew away. Instead of chasing it, Wesley watched it go with wonder. She went home to her babies. Elias and Ava exchanged a look over their son's head, both thinking the same thing. Somehow this little boy already understood what mattered most. "Wesley," Ava said gently, "how would you feel about having a little brother or sister?" Wesley's eyes went wide. "A baby? Like at Miss Carmen's?" "Like that, but one who would live here with us. Would you like that?" Wesley considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important decisions. "Would I teach them about bubbles?" "You would teach them about lots of things." "Okay, but I'm still the big boy, right?" "You'll always be our first baby," Elias assured him, and Wesley nodded as if this settled everything important. As the sun began to set behind the Olympics, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the three of them sat on their porch in the home they'd chosen together, watching bubbles drift across the yard and talking about the baby who would join their family in 7 months. Elias thought about the man he'd been 3 years ago, successful but empty, wealthy but alone, convinced that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. That man never could have imagined this moment. Grass stains on his jeans, toy trucks scattered across his yard, and a heart so full it sometimes ached with gratitude. "Do you know what I love most about our story?" Ava asked as Wesley dozed against Elias's chest, exhausted from his afternoon of adventures. "What's that?" "It's not a fairy tale. We didn't fall in love and live happily ever after. We fell in love, messed it up completely, broke each other's hearts, and then chose to put the pieces back together. We earned this happiness." Elias looked at his wife. They'd been married for 6 months now in a small ceremony in the same park where they'd first talked about finding their ground together, and felt the truth of her words settle in his bones. "We did," he agreed, "and we'll keep earning it." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elias carried his sleeping son inside, while Ava turned off the bubble machine and gathered the scattered toys. They moved through their evening routine with the practiced rhythm of a family that had found its rhythm, bath time and story time, and the soft sounds of a house settling into sleep. Later, as they lay in their bed with Wesley finally asleep in his own room down the hall, Ava's hand found Elias's in the darkness. "I love you," she whispered, words that had become as natural and necessary as breathing. "I love you too," he whispered back. "All of you. All of us." Outside their window, Seattle sparkled with a million lights, each one representing someone else's story, someone else's chance at love and loss and redemption. But inside their home, in their bed, with their son sleeping peacefully down the hall and their future growing inside Ava's body, Elias knew he was exactly where he belonged. Sometimes second chances came disguised as disasters. Sometimes the greatest gifts arrived through the most painful losses. And sometimes when you stopped running from love long enough to let it catch you, it transformed everything you thought you knew about happiness. The sound of a baby crying had once shattered Elias Thorne's carefully constructed world. Now, the sound of his family breathing softly in sleep was the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. The end. Have you ever had a moment where fear made you push away the very thing you needed most? Where pride or past hurt convinced you to choose safety over love? Elias and Ava's story reminds us that sometimes our biggest mistakes can lead to our greatest redemptions, but only if we're brave enough to fight for what truly matters. What would you have done in Elias's place that morning 8 months ago? Would you have had the courage to ask the hard questions instead of making assumptions? And if you were Ava, could you have found the strength to trust again after being abandoned when you needed someone most? Love isn't about perfect people finding each other. It's about imperfect people choosing each other over and over again, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.